Hey, I'm Fred Lewis Jr. I'm the first generation, uh, after the founders. So my father was one of the major people that incorporated. But in the days that they started this, I think a lot of the Chinese had come to Portland. They were actually people born in mainland China. They did not speak a lot of English, and obviously they did not go through American English education. So I think the business that they started or worked in was just to survive. And the first place he worked at was at a gambling house because that's something the Chinese could do. Food service was not on their mind. Um, I think eventually they realized if they want to pay rent, support a family, they have to get a real job and not just work in a gambling house. So this went on, and I think one day they realized we need to go get a real job. And that's when they started looking for business to get into. And that's where the possibility of having a restaurant came to mind. And looking out at 82nd, nobody ever told me this, but I think it was further out, cheap rent. And the more I think about this, I think at the time, because of the Depression, I think the building might have been empty for a while. Because there was a gap, there was a fruit stand there, and there was a gap almost 10 years during the Depression before they came in as a restaurant. Although when we were cleaning the attic out, we found a bunch of soda fountain tanks. So the soda fountain tanks might fill in for why end of the farmers market, tent market, and the start of Canton Grill. There were some years there that until recently I had no idea there was a gap. So they got in there. I think the place was empty. They needed a tenant, and the rent was probably relatively cheap, and they were willing to sign a lease. This has nothing to do with this particular point, but after they signed the lease for the building, the guy that owned the lot on the corner, he came up and actually rented the lot to my dad for a parking lot. And it was some ridiculous, like $10 a month. I mean, this is impossible in today's logic, but he either trusted my dad or they were really desperate to get a tenant on their parking lot. And I found a little scratch-it pad, not even a full ledger pad. They actually wrote this out and both signed it. And I know I can find it again. For like $10 a month, they're going to rent him this parking lot for the restaurant. So I thought that was kind of a nice surprise, and I went through all the junk we had to sort out. Yeah. They actually rented a whole parking lot for $10 a month.
My name is Cindy Lewis, and I am the granddaughter of one of the original founders of the Canton, and Fred is my dad. And my sisters and I, we all grew up with the Canton, and growing up, I think we all started bussing tables, I think in about the 6th grade all the way until until high school, and then typically we would go to college and then we came back or not. But the Canton was very much my home away from home growing up, as it was for myself, a lot of my cousins, and for my dad, although a generation later. And it's just a place with a million wonderful memories of family that was both by blood and that just came through and walked through the doors.
Thinking back, my dad's generation, they had a confidence in themselves. They had the guts to come out here in 82nd. Not only were there no other Chinese restaurants, I'm not so sure there was any restaurants out here. Like, this used to be the area where they sold used cars. And that kind of, for a long time, that's what the area was known for. And there was no other people business, it's just car business. But to think, I guess, maybe 50 years from now, they'll history books, they go back and they were among the first families that took a chance. And for some of them, they commend their working life out here to develop a business, and they stuck with it. A lot of the families that grew up out here, like I talked to somebody this week, he was a busboy at the new Cathay when he's grown up, and now he's a retired school administrator for the public school. So a lot of the Chinese that are in Portland now, their families had their fingers or their start on 82nd, and a lot of them have moved down the area, but they still remember their parents worked 50 years on 82nd. And so hopefully the new building will retain some of the history of the people that came out here and worked their working life 50 years, and hopefully those people aren't forgotten, that those first people started it and the next generation added on. Now they lived all over, but without that first generation working the long hours, the other generation, who knows what might have happened, or nothing would have happened. Maybe the Chinese wouldn't even come to this area. So I can't really think. I think our restaurant is only part of the history of all the restaurants. So I don't think we want to be the focus. We just want to be part of the story.
I mean, I think from beginning to end, it's always been about family. And whether it's my family and all of the history that and time that they've put into making the Canton, whether it's, I mean, you've seen the pictures, or my dad has like the pictures of like the old New Year's dinners and stuff, where all of the staff and everything would get together, and or we would have like these huge family meals. Whether it's the family of like the employees, because I just saw some of them last weekend, and I went to a baby shower for one of our regulars, and in the end, I think that's really what it is. The legacy of the community that the space provided, and the the family room. Like so many people would especially like come into the bar or come into the restaurant or get takeout, and they're just like, it's such a part of people's sense of continuity and life and family that it's like a living room. And having, whether it is like your genetic family, your found family along the way, it's especially with how different the world is now compared to what it was when I was growing up, that very like Asian sense of family. And I see my sister's kids and I love them dearly. And just like the perspectives of what family is, like this generation compared to the next generation, it just changes so quickly. So being able to hang on to and foster that feeling of community and family would be absolutely amazing. Just with the way we ran things, we would have a lot of our staff was with us for 10, 20, 25 years. I ran it for more than a decade, and I think I had to hire maybe 2 people in that time frame, which for a restaurant is unheard of, at least for the front of house. And it was because we all worked together. We all knew each other. We all knew what everybody else had going on in their lives. And it was like a space to share that with each other and with our customers, and just to see like 5 generations of a family coming in to eat and just being part of a fabric of their lives and their memories throughout all that time. And so hopefully, yeah, that sense of family.
This is hearsay, but I'm thinking when you do a job application, you're out of college, and your name is Louie, they just put you in the pile that they don't call you back. So at some point, he changed it, that one last letter, so that it was more Americanized. I think it had to do with job application, getting employed, getting past that initial interview, see if anybody would hire him, because he was a college educated chemist, but he couldn't get a job. I think other than the fact I asked you, is that the correct spelling? I don't think it actually caused me any awkward moments, and just that one short question, is that the correct spelling for your name? So I can remember though, we were down at Lincoln City trying to rent a motel, and there was a sign vacancy. Park the car, walk up there, and by the time you got up there, they'd take one look at you. Well, we just rented it. You're trying to get a motel for the night. This is like in the 60s, 70s, this 50 years ago. So
I somehow, not stupidly as a child, but it didn't occur to me for the longest time that at somewhere in my history that my last name was originally Louie until I asked, because obviously Louis is not a common Chinese, it isn't a Chinese last name. I grew up with it being that's what it was, and so that's just always what my last name has been. There was a brief period in my life where I was, because you could pronounce Louis, 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 which is also why I feel like in part he may have picked it, because it is like a common way to pronounce it. When I was growing up as a kid, and Portland still is very white, and so growing up, it was like essentially my sisters and my cousins and I were the Asian kids in school. And like that was it. So it I didn't have an alternate frame of reference to give it additional thought to. As I got older, I did have a period of my life where I was going by using my last name as Louie, pronouncing it as Louie versus Lewis. But then it felt strange because my entire family identifies themselves as Lewis, so I went back to match.
Okay, going far back, he came when he was very young to New York City. His father, who I never met, at some point, and probably when he got there, had a laundry. Not a fancy laundry, just a small hand laundry. So my dad was in New York City during the Depression, and side story, he would work in a restaurant for meals and tips. They didn't bother to pay him. This is during the Depression, so they get away with it. He did graduate grade school, high school, New York, and he eventually went to Tri-State College in Angola, Indiana. And don't ask me why, but he graduated with a engineering degree, and his, I guess, is in chemistry. In his thinking, when he eventually went back to China, he wanted to start a cosmetic factory. This is, now that we look back, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, we're talking about 10 years after the Depression. But I was going through paperwork. I found his diploma from Angola Tri-State College. And I have a big collection of chemistry books that he saved all these years. Now I look at that and I says, why did he do all that? He ended up in the Chinese restaurant business. And to make my dad did not know how to cook, period. He never knew how to cook, so I don't know how he ended up in the restaurant business. Sidetrack, when he first came to Portland, he went to work for one of the relatives, and the relatives have a building front that was a import store, but the real business was they had a gambling house in the back, and they sold lottery tickets, which at the time, although they were not legal, they were very common. I think a lot of the Chinese sold lottery tickets, especially if you don't speak the language. What are you going to do for a living? So selling lottery tickets was an option. To make a short story, with the gambling house that he worked for, one of the relatives had it that was from the old village. And they had a big fire one night, and the whole place just, and that may have something to impetus to go into the restaurant business, because they were getting by on the gambling house barely, but now that wasn't even there. That was gone. Reality is what's available. And like I mentioned earlier, I think that building might have been vacant when they approached them, because there was at least 5 years that after the farmer's market tent, they sent us that picture and it had a date on it, from the end of their date and our first date. So I think the building was probably very available, because they hadn't probably, this is like after the Depression area where everything shut down. So the building probably had no activity for at least 5 years, probably more than that. So I think and I have no idea what the rent was, but I imagine it was cheap because the landlord was desperate. I honestly cannot figure out where we were living in 1944. I really don't know. My dad eventually, 3 years after they opened the business, he bought a 1947 Chevrolet Fleetmaster. Those cars with the velour seats, like the old Greyhound buses. And that was in the Hawthorne area. I remember that house. We lived there when World War II was still on, because they had homing pigeons flying through the attic. This is during a time when people were food rationing. They actually raised homing pigeons in the attic, so I guess to get the protein. And before we went back to China, that was the house we lived in. But I don't think my dad had a car when we lived in that house. I have no idea how he got to work. No idea.
I was like, I don't know who invented the Honolulu. Traditionally made with gin. Let's see how well I remember this, because I haven't thought about it in a minute. There is orange juice, pineapple juice, grapefruit juice, some sour mix. There is straight up some granulated sugar added into there. Some grenadine for the color. And traditionally, the classic way to make it was blended with gin. But as time and tastes shifted, we would have more folks making it with, I feel like bourbon whiskey in the end became a pretty popular choice, but also vodka or rum. And every year during our anniversary month in August, Honolulus were discounted. This actually brings me back to pork noodles, because then there was always one Wednesday during the month of August where it would be the actual anniversary celebration day. And we would do $1 bowls of pork noodles and $1. I feel like it was cheaper than that when I was growing up, but at the end we bumped it up to $1. Is that right? $1 Honolulus as well.
Yeah, I don't think we ever changed the price on that. Just it was easier. We weren't going to make any money on it anyway, so just to keep it simple.
And it would be an absolute day of chaos. We would have to set up blenders for each of the different types of alcohol so that we could be making them constantly. We would make these huge vats of the mixer, like prepped and ready to go. And my dad would always have a stash of the Chinese soup spoons hidden away specifically for this day. And it was mayhem. Like, so for like from 4 to 9, now I'm like second guessing myself, 4 to 9, 4 to 8, we would do like Honolulu's for $1. And so people would come in and
It's essentially free.
yeah, like we would open up the sliding pocket doors to the banquet room, and make that all part of the bar space. We would have 3 cocktail servers. We'd have 3 people behind the bar. We'd have 4 servers out in the dining room, and just blending and blending and blending drinks, and pork noodles and pork fried rice for $1. I forgot the fried rice.
And the reference of saving up all the soup spoons, that's for?
Because of the pork noodles. When we would serve the pork noodles, like, so my dad would have an extra stash of soup spoons because we would have so many bowls of noodles that, I mean, there's no reason in the world to have that many Chinese soup spoons out the rest of the year until you're selling pork noodles for $1 a piece. Does that sound right, Dad?
Yep.
Yeah, I graduated from high school in '94. I spent a couple years in Boston. I ended up graduating from the University of Washington with a degree in oceanography and a minor in chemistry. I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself, so I was like, I'm going to go to New York because I could do anything and not know and survive and enjoy life, and it would be fine. And I worked random jobs, did whatever there, worked in offices and traveled, and my parents were getting older. And for a while we had a cousin and an uncle of mine who were going to help take on some of the ownership and some of the responsibility of the canton, and that didn't end up working out the way that we had hoped or anticipated. So it was back to just my parents. And they weren't getting any younger because that's not the way time works. And I kind of made a decision that if I was going to be working random jobs in New York, that benefited me and no one else in any way that really mattered. I decided to move back home. And at the time, I think my parents said, okay, we'll do this for 5 years and then we'll get to say goodbye to the restaurant on our own terms, and we can just plan it out that way. I moved back, and obviously I grew up working in the restaurant. I never managed, and I came back and it was a crash course in restaurant management. I moved back the same year restaurants in Portland were going non-smoking. So I got back in May, and we made the decision to close for a few days in July with the 4th of July so that we could repaint, put new carpets in, clean all the walls, and that was my very harsh crash course. And guess what? You are managing a restaurant now. 5 years came and went, and we kind of just never talked about it actually closing. So we just kept doing it. And eventually COVID did happen, and right before, actually, I blamed my mother for everything, I think. So, I think they called out warnings for COVID in January, but that end of November, December? No, it was December. My mom had my mom had a hemorrhagic stroke. So even if COVID didn't happen, and my mom is fine now, driving is crazy, as she won't listen to us about her diabetes, which is a plight of many, many children my age. But it definitely did make us take a second look about just being able to make sure she had everything she needed, and she's regained all of her function and everything now. But she was in the ICU for
19 days.
For almost 3 weeks in the ICU before she got to come home. And then COVID happened, and we looked at the landscape and what we thought we could or couldn't do. And I think if the restaurant were significantly smaller, we probably would have entertained possibly the idea of keeping it going, but with the size, with the bar, just the overhead of having such a large space and having to have that many people employed in order to keep it running, COVID just made it seem like the right time to say, we shouldn't keep doing this. My dad was the one in the kitchen who was realigning the blades in the shrimp peeler, who would help us out with the grease traps once a week, and I was perfectly happy to do the front of house stuff, the accounting, the bookkeeping, ordering, all of that stuff, but figuring out the plumbing in the men's room and the urinal was not on the list of things that I felt the inclination to learn about. And just like, the little equipment failure things was not something I wanted to keep up with, and my dad was still getting older compared to when I first moved home. So shutting down during COVID was the extra reason we needed to kind of push us over the edge into making that decision to close the restaurant.
We kind of did what our parents told us to do. So it's, I don't think my dad ever actually pressured me to stay in the restaurant business, but it just seemed like the right thing to do. So like Cindy said, the COVID thing, we were kind of barely holding on. So it was a case of once you shut down for 3-4 months, and all of a sudden, all your staff, we got to go get a real job. So we decided it's time to not just keep them feeling guilty that they're going to go work for somewhere else, because it's hard to. It took us years to build up a crew, and then you're shut down for 6 months and you have to start over again. It's just not possible. So